What about the performance mode, which on console on the original PlayStation 5 was notably sub 1080p and was probably like our largest negative point regarding the last generation or the current generation versions of this game, where we said like, oh, it's a great looking game, but the performance mode is visually a little bit rough. How does PlayStation 5 Pro improve on that?
Yes, yeah. So I would say that image quality wise, if we want to start there, we're looking at a lot of similar problems. The old FSR2 mode, unfortunately, the old FSR2 mode went from 847p to 1440p. Here, apparently, we're going from 864p to 2160p, which isn't really borne out in some of the comparisons between them, because it's not actually that much sharper. I would say
Right.
it's kind of even a bit softer in some areas. It also suffers from that same fundamental issue with image instability. When we're moving through a scene, I think the Pro does a more effective job with anti-aliasing and minimizing artifacts. Disocclusion isn't as much of an issue. And like there are some areas, like before I was pointing at the power lines and the oh dear sign, both of those are better on PS5 Pro. But I would say that in stills, weirdly, PSSR looks a little soft. It's not super stable. I was hoping for a stronger visual transformation there, because I think that kind of the dream of PS5 Pro is that we look at these modes and we say, oh, this is a solid like 4K 60 performance mode. I think that's what we're looking for in a lot of these games, if we're not seeing that substantial improvement in terms of the ray tracing. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that here. I'd also point out that in the new performance mode, there are some improvements with respect to the visual settings, the underlying visual settings. Basically, as Remedy put it in their blog, they've bumped up the visual settings to something that is about at the level of the old quality mode here. So foliage density, for instance, with these shrubs in the woods and with these blades of grass here, it is more similar to that old quality mode. It's quite a bit better. The ground clutter, it looks like there's a bit more clutter
Right.
there as well. Volumetric lighting is higher resolution, as we can see in this mode here, although Alex will talk about this a little bit later, but at least in shots when you get a real direct view of that volumetric lighting, you can see sometimes more detail in that volumetric lighting. It appears high resolution, like with this light streaming through the canopy, it does look quite a bit better. And the shadows have also been upgraded a bit, but resolution and filtering looks similar. But some objects like this flag and NPC here cast shadows now at a distance, whereas before they did not. Lastly, there's one other weird quirk with this mode that I wanted to mention before we get on to performance, which is that it looks like when you switch between the modes, the ambient occlusion is not rendering properly, or at all possibly, on the performance mode. It makes the grass look kind of like it's floating in this scene. This only happened to me when I was switching between modes, like I'm switching between quality mode and performance mode, or vice versa, and then back again. The ambient occlusion seems to turn off, but in reverse, when I'm switching from the performance mode to the quality mode, the ambient occlusion usually turns back on, but sometimes it can take a bit of time there. But when you switch to performance mode, it doesn't ever seem to come back. So my recommendation would be, if you want to play in the performance mode, don't do too much mode switching, because it makes the game look kind of bizarre with the ambient occlusion turned off. You really want to just reload your save, go into performance mode, don't switch. So yeah, that is a weird issue. Hopefully they can resolve that. But yeah, that's my kind of baseline impression of the non-performance aspects of the performance mode there.
I mean, here they mentioned it on their blog in a way that I thought was, I don't know if I take umbrage with it necessarily, but I would kind of do the upgrade maybe a little differently. They mentioned the kind of improving the quality of the pixels that are fed into their upscaling to get it up to a higher res, but they fundamentally kept the resolution the same. And what they meant by increasing the quality of the pixels was increasing some settings, like you described, the bring it up to those old quality mode settings in the performance mode. But your description of the image quality, it has, like, you do mention plus points, but it isn't bringing it up to the expectations, I think, of like what you described, what we expect of the PlayStation 5 Pro to a certain degree, based upon its like advertising and also like the strengths of the machine, where it doesn't seem like, I don't know, this is a bit of a subjective question, but like, do you think it was right to increase the settings there on PlayStation 5 based on the performance you're seeing? Like, What's the performance like?
Yeah, so I'll get the performance in a moment there before answering your question, I suppose. I think there are some implications here possibly for the answer to that question, unfortunately. Just as a refresher, performance in the performance mode, a bit of a tongue twister there, was not perfect. Artificial environments generally fine, but the forested areas suffered a bit from sub 60 FPS bouts. Did not run at a perfect 60 FPS. On PS5 Pro, it's a bit worse, unfortunately. So you can see that in this walkthrough, the forest area where the Pro is kind of running a little bit behind the base PS5. And then I matched up 2 shots in this more demanding area about as well as I can. In shot 1, it's about a 53 versus 50 FPS split. Shot 2, about 57 FPS versus 53 FPS. So it drops more often, and it drops harder when both are affected. Not the end of the world, and to be fair, I don't think it drops below 48 FPS in more demanding areas. Typically, I did not observe that at least. The lowest I saw was about 50 FPS. It should be fine with VRR, but it doesn't run as well as the base console, unfortunately. And so to answer your question, ultimately, I think in the performance mode in particular, I expected a more stable image. And indeed with FSR, in some respects, you are getting a more stable image in stills, which is kind of when you tend to be really fixated on it. At other times, you might not be as fixated on it. So I think that overall, increasing the settings, and in particular, increasing the output resolution to 4K is maybe not the way that I would have gone with things personally, because I don't even really think you're getting anything like a full 4K worth of detail, unfortunately, with PSSR at the moment. So it seems like, I don't know, presumably this is something they tested, but maybe 864p to 1440p, give yourself a bit more GPU time, keep the settings the same, or maybe even pull them back a little bit, because the old performance mode settings looked fine. If they are paying a significant performance penalty, again, assuming that's true, I don't know that it is true, but I probably would have gone a bit of a different way about it with the kind of way that the consoles are configured at the moment, because unfortunately, I think there are some real positive points here, but it's also not, I think, quite what players are looking for out of PS5 Pro with those 4K 60 modes, with those 4K 30 modes that are pushing out more advanced ray tracing. Not 100% where I'd like it to be at the moment.
I think that sounds reasonable. And as I was letting on with my question there, usually you would just want the game to be better in all aspects, and having to have like a mixed upgrade is always... it's not a great thing to offer just the player, because they come potentially from the PlayStation 5 version where they expect everything to be better with something called Pro. But then if only some things are better, but some things are worse, then it's like a bit of a mixed feeling. It isn't too great.